It's October, and you all know what that means. It's time for jump scares, candy, and an excuse to wear costumes since it's deemed socially acceptable for one day and one day only. And I thought that the best way to start off Halloween week would be to cover the scariest subject of all, confronting your problems and accepting change. No, but seriously, if you haven't seen Infinity Train yet, I highly recommend it. It's only 10 episodes long, so it's a relatively short watch that you can finish in just under 2 hours. It's also perfect to watch for the spooky month of October, since along with tackling serious themes, it does fall under the horror and comedy genre. But today, we aren't going to talk about how Infinity Train managed to nail the horror aspect, at least not entirely. Today we're talking about why this show was under the horror genre, why it fits it, the purpose of the train, and what it represents. So passengers, please remain in your seats because this is going to be a bumpy ride.
Oh, you're okay. I'll just keep your obituary on file then.
Infinity Train follows the story of a young girl named Tulip whose parents have recently gone through a divorce. Because this is such a recent and sudden change, neither Tulip nor her parents have had the chance to adjust to it yet. In direct consequence of this, there's a scheduling error between her parents that prevents her from going to her game design camp in Wisconsin, which she was promised she was allowed to go to. On top of the divorce, this is all too much for Tulip, and she decides that she's going to go to Wisconsin herself without the help of her parents. She tries to walk there, but runs into the Infinity Train while in the woods. The train obviously came for her specifically, as it came out of nowhere and just happened to be heading to the exact location that she was bound. Tulip steps onto the train, but is promptly knocked out by a beam of light that renders her unconscious. When she wakes up, she's in the center of a snowy field, except it isn't actually a snowy field after all. In reality, it's a train cart that doesn't look or feel like a train cart. Once this discovery is made, Tulip notices a glowing green number on her hand, which prompts her to seek answers. In trying to get off the train, she befriends Atticus and 1-1, a king corgi and a peculiar little robot that can split into two. The three travel along hundreds of train cars, trying to solve their own individual problems. Tulip wants to get off the train and go home, 1-1 wants to find his mother, and Atticus wants to find out why his kingdom is falling apart and fix it. The three have very different and admirable goals and learn a lot of lessons on their journey that spans several months. Some train cars will only open their doors once a riddle is solved or once the participant does something that the train approves of. Occasionally, when an important lesson is learned, the number on Tulip's hand will go down. At first, it was hard for Tulip to understand what affected the numbers on her hand, but it became increasingly obvious the more time she spent on the train. Her number was going down the more she was starting to accept change, that change mainly being her parents' divorce. Of course, there are other factors that had a direct influence over her number, but the biggest and most notable was the divorce, which is arguably the catalyst to a lot of her problems to begin with. Once the number reaches 0, the train opens a door that leads back home and is Tulip's exit. It's also extremely notable to mention that Tulip's number doesn't drop to 0 until she admits to herself that she's afraid of her problems and running away from them. The door opened because she fully accepted that there is a change in her life and that there isn't anything she can do about it. The only thing that she can control now is how she reacts to it and how she copes. The train is there to help people work through their fears and their problems and is meant to represent a person's train of thought. It's actually kind of funny that it's a pun, but I digress.
She's hurt. And she's running away from the changes in her life because she's afraid. Like me.
It's an Infinity Train because it's very easy for someone to get caught in a loop of negative thoughts and emotions. And it's very easy to only be focused on the bad that happened to you, be spiteful, and be unable to let go of the pain you've been subjected to. Some people get stuck in this loop on the path to recovery, and this is what the train is meant to represent. There is no exit in sight because the only way to exit the train of thought is to confront the problem. And to a lot of people, the thought of this is terrifying. So terrifying, in fact, that they would rather remain hurt and stay hurt than face their problems head on. Change is terrifying. At least when you're in pain, you know what to expect. When you try and change the situation you're in by accepting the change or trauma, you don't know what to expect. It could be better or it could be worse, but you don't know. And this fear of the unknown is what keeps people in this infinite loop that they cannot escape. Taking that step forward is the only way to escape the purgatory within your mind, but it takes time, and sometimes that step forward needs to be a tiptoe instead of a leap. Fixing small problems along the way helps you prepare and commit to that change. Small changes and learned lessons in your life is what leads to you changing as a person overall. In Tulip's case specifically, she learns to be patient, that things don't solve themselves automatically, and that's okay. She learns that not everything needs to make sense or be logical. She learns that her parents' divorce wasn't her fault, and that sometimes when you're hurt, it isn't a consequence of your actions, but of others. She learns that reaching out for help isn't a sign of weakness. And most importantly, she learns to accept change. All of these seemingly small lessons and self-actualizations add up until Tulip is a new and better person because of it. But what happens if you stray from the path of changing for the better and instead you change for the worst? Well, this is also shown through symbolism. The Goms, which are the roach dog-looking creatures, are shown to suck the life force out of their victims. They're only seen outside of the train and catch defectors who decide to get off and further run from their problems. Of course, the one exception is Atticus, but since he was transformed into a Gom by the conductor, we aren't going to count him. The Goms would presumably feed off whatever living creature they can find, making them grow old and withered. And if I had to guess, they could potentially turn their victim into a Gom as well if they didn't kill them in the process. Sometimes when people are stuck in this infinite loop of pain, instead of either continuing on forever this way or facing their problems, they refuse to work through their pain and instead cope in unhealthy and dangerous ways. An individual could turn to a life of crime or choose to hurt others as a way of coping, moving past recognition of the person that they once were. The Goms take souls because this symbolizes that the person who once there is no longer, that they're dying and becoming something new and different. And unlike changing for the better, they're changing for the worst. The Goms could be representative of many things: drugs, toxic individuals, self-harm, poor life decisions, a life of crime, trauma, anything that would completely change a person to the point of them no longer being the same person that they once were. These bad things that people may decide to do to cope with their pain and run from their problems eventually destroy the recipient, and quite literally sucks the life out of them. It kills the person who was once there, and instead a husk of who once was remains. Tulip nearly takes this path. She runs away from home, which could have ended in disaster if she decided to never return. But as soon as the Goms confronted her, she didn't embrace them. She ran from them and went right back onto the train, even after one of them tried to pull her back. Tulip almost went down the path of harmful coping, but she stopped herself before it was too late and before too many bad decisions were made. But the two extremes here aren't the only options. For better or for worse isn't the end-all be-all. There is a third option that is rarely acknowledged as an actual path that many take: staying the same and refusal to change, otherwise known as escapism. There are some people who refuse to cope in an unhealthy way in regards to their trauma, and there are some people who also refuse to get better through acceptance. Instead of dealing what they're going through in unhealthy or healthy ways, there's also straight up denial and unwillingness to acknowledge the problem and to accept it. Instead, they ignore it or attempt to ignore it. Meet Amelia Hughes, wife to the deceased Ulrich Timmins. Amelia's husband Ulrich suddenly passed away when he was very young, causing Amelia so much grief and pain that she ended up boarding the Infinity Train. However, instead of either getting off the train to be Gom bait or moving forward to eventually exit, Amelia decides that she's going to do neither. She doesn't want to accept or even think about a life without Ulrich, and instead decides to fix the problem and act like it never happened. Once she figures out how the train works, she hijacks it and attempts to make her own car, one where she and Ulrich can live out the college days for the rest of their lives, and a life where she will never need to live without him. She believes that this will effectively allow her to escape and completely ignore the reality of her husband's death, because it will be like he was never gone. It can't hurt her if she's refusing to think about it. She immerses herself in illusion, avoiding the reality that Ulrich is dead. Even if she could make a replacement, it still wouldn't be the real Ulrich or change the past. But instead of accepting this and moving on, she immerses herself in avoidance behavior after avoidance behavior. Because if she chose the self-destruction path or self-improvement path, either way, she would need to admit that Ulrich was gone and wasn't coming back. And she wasn't willing to let go of him just yet, and instead stayed still and refused to move forward in one way or another. And the further down the path of illusion and avoidance she went, the further away she got from changing. The further she dove into the impracticality and impossibility of bringing her husband back, the more set in her ways and obsessed she became. As Amelia says, numbers don't just go down, they also go up. It is possible to become so set in your ways that it's almost impossible to change. And it's possible to become more and more scared of said change that you just keep suffering in order to avoid it. Your life could pass you by, but you could still be stuck in the past, refusing to believe that your life has changed and that you need to change as well to adapt, rejecting help, rejecting reality, rejecting change. This is the third path. And it's a path that still has an undetermined ending if you ever decide to reach it. Emilia could still decide to take a path of harmful coping, or she could finally decide to work on her problems and face reality by eventually exiting the train and resuming her life without Ulrich in it. Change is scary, but for better or for worse, you can't move forward or backwards without it. Running from it will only prolong your suffering and keep you where you were. The pain won't go away if you refuse to confront or acknowledge it. You may not know what lies ahead, but you won't know if you can get through it and if you'll be happy unless you try. As shown in the first episode, taking the first step is terrifying. It looks like the end of the world, but it really isn't. It's just the end of your current life of suffering and the beginning of something new. Whether that beginning will lead to something good or bad, you won't know until you take that step. A reality that Tulip wasn't ready to face, and one that she found terrifying upon entry to the train. But after learning that acceptance was the only way out of her train of thought, she decided that it was worth the risk. There was no changing what happened to her family, but she couldn't allow that to consume her. Sure, things were different now, but they didn't need to be miserable. She just needed to be willing to adapt and accept, no matter how painful or unfair it seemed initially. And that's the meaning behind and reason why the Infinity Train exists. To teach people lessons and to help them escape the infinite loop that they're trapped in, effectively and essentially changing their lives. Whether in a good or bad way, that's up to you to decide as an individual. Change is scary, but change is needed to move forward and to get better. That said, this is just my interpretation of the show's core themes. There's lore that I didn't cover in this video, and I'm sure there's a lot more that can be said in regards to hidden messages or other interpretations. As always, I'd love to see your thoughts in the comments or over on my Twitter. This show, I'm sure, resonated with a lot of people differently, so I look forward to the variety of responses. Today's video is powered by Patreon. My top tier patrons are Zachary Ansley, Baselayer, Taz, Ambrose Rothwood, and Brandon Nunes. It's because of people like them that I can continue to make content like this. And if you liked this video, why not subscribe and hit that bell icon to receive notifications from me of when I upload. And I will see you all in the next video. Have an amazing day, everyone.